my interest was to get behind that picket fence because that's where that Dallas police officer was headed. And he was in the motorcade. He was he was a traffic officer. I worked in that area for, probably 7, 8 minutes, maybe, something like that, until I ran on to Mr. and Mrs. Arnold Rowland. Now, Mr. Rowland told me that 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, he saw 2 men on the 6th floor of the school book depository. Now, one was a white male in the east corner of the 6th floor with a rifle. The other one was a colored male at the west end of the 6th floor, pacing back and forth.
Well, I saw this man in the window, and he had a gun in his hands pointed downward. The man evidently was in a kneeling position because his forearms were resting on the window sill. There was another man standing beside him, but I only saw a portion of his body because he was standing partly against, behind the window, halfway in the window.
Mauser German-made rifle with the sniper scope sights that was found on the German-built Mauser with the sniper scope that was used to kill President Kennedy.
7.65 Mauser, German rifle, familiar to those who served in World War II.
Place. It's a 7.65 Mauser, German-made Army rifle, telescopic sight, and 1 shell left in the chamber. 3 spent shells have been found nearby, and apparently they're hooking this as the murder weapon.
Sniper scope, high-powered Mauser
The Dallas
rifle.
Sheriff's Department said the rifle had been found in a staircase on the 5th floor of a building near the scene of the assassination. It was a 7.65 Mauser.
A German Mauser, I believe.
There is another word that a Mauser has been found.
Mauser.
Oswald worked in the building where the murder weapon, the German-made Mauser rifle, was
one still found in the Mauser with which the assassin was apparently armed.
And we began then to search for a weapon. And we started toward, everybody took a different direction, and Deputy Sheriff Boone and myself just happened to head for the northwest corner of the building. And Boone was ahead of me by about 8 feet. And there were a stack of boxes just at the head of the stairwell going downstairs. And Boone looked over into it and said, "Here it is. Here's the rifle." So I immediately went over beside him and looked over, and there was a rifle. But we didn't touch it until Captain Fritz and Lieutenant Day from the ID department of the Dallas Police Department got there. Now, Captain Fritz was chief of homicide, and Lieutenant Day was from the Identification Bureau. They got there and took some pictures of the rifle, and then I believe Day pulled the rifle out and handed it to Captain Fritz, who held it up by the, had a strap on it. He held it up by the strap and asked if anyone knew what kind of rifle it was. Well, by this time, Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman had joined us. And Weitzman was a gun buff. He had a sporting goods store at one time, and he was very good with weapons. And he said it looks like a Mauser, and he walked over to Fritz, and Captain Fritz was holding the rifle up in the air, and I was standing next to Weitzman, who was standing next to Fritz, and we weren't any more than 6 or 8 inches from the rifle, and stamped right on the barrel of the rifle was 7.65 Mauser. And that's when Weitzman said it is a Mauser and pointed to the 7.65 Mauser stamp on the barrel.
But there is even better proof. That's the testimony of Darrell C. Tomlinson before the Warren Commission. It was taken on March 20th, 1964, right at Parkland Hospital by our friend Arlen Specter. And remember, Tomlinson is the man who found the bullet. There was only one question that needed to be asked that day of Tomlinson. It was obvious to everyone. That question is CE399 the bullet that you found that day here at Parkland Hospital? Incredibly, Specter never asked Tomlinson that question. As a matter of fact, he asked Tomlinson no questions about any aspect of the bullet. He didn't ask one question about the bullet Tomlinson found, including if CE399 was that bullet. He couldn't ask because he knew the answer would be no. So on June 24, 1964, FBI agent Todd, who received the bullet from Rowley, the head of the Secret Service, returned with a bullet to get Secret Service agents Johnson and Rowley to identify it. Commission Exhibit 2011 reports that both Johnson and Rowley advised Todd that they could not identify this bullet as the one they saw on the day of the assassination.
Willie Somerset, a union organizer with extensive right-wing political ties, was the Miami police informant. Joseph Miltier was the wealthy, rabble-rousing racist from Quitman, Georgia. In charge of the surveillance operation was Miami detective Everett Kay.
Well, we had to set up the tape recorder in Somerset's apartment.
Well, how the hell do you figure the best way would be to get it? From an office building. With a high margin rifle. Boy, if that Kennedy gets shot, we gotta know where we at. Yeah, but you know, boy, that would be a real shame if they do that. There wouldn't be any stone unturned there. Oh, no way. Oh, hell no. And, they'll pick up somebody within hours after. And they might get what happened. Well, just do that. Throw the public off. Yeah, that's right. They're going to really try to kill it.
Miltier was interviewed by the FBI and then released. Miltier later boasted to Somerset that he went to witness the assassination in Dallas.
And routine assistance from military personnel from bases in the area to assist in the protection of the president was most uncharacteristically refused. Again by the Secret Service in Washington, and specifically by Secret Service Washington Chief James Rowley. Further, when Chicago Secret Service agent Abraham Bolden tried to contact the Warren Commission several months later with information about the Chicago plot, he was arrested on false charges. Bolden was placed in jail, keeping him from telling what he knew about the Chicago plot to the public and the Warren Commission. Not one word about the Chicago plot appears in the Warren Commission report.
We have the Chicago plot, which is so similar to what happened in Dallas. So, I mean, how could that be covered up by Castro? How could that be covered up by the mafia? How could that be covered up by the KGB? That it was just a coincidence that both those plots were so similar to each other? See, clearly somebody was saying, we got to get rid of this guy, and we have to get rid of him in the fall of 1963. We can't let him run the risk of being reelected. We can't get rid of him during an election campaign. We have to get rid of him now. That clearly seems to be the message of those two plots in November. Somebody's hunting down Kennedy. He's not getting out of 1963 alive.
The Imperial reflex camera that took the famous backyard photos and a miniature Minox spy camera won't be located until weeks later. Here's the official report. Yet somehow the Imperial reflex camera that supposedly took the backyard photos will miraculously show up in the already searched bags of Oswald in the garage. And here again is a report that shows the bags were already searched and no camera was present. By this time, February 1963, Ruth and Michael will claim to be separated. They have two very small children, a 2-year-old and another child 3.5. Both Ruth and Michael will make statements that they did not like Lee very much and even accuse him of physically accosting Marina at times. So with two very small children and a father who is not going to be present since he is separated, Michael and Ruth invite people they don't even know with a possible propensity for domestic violence by Lee to live in extremely close contact with their children. Does that make sense? What father or mother would invite or even allow a stranger with a propensity for domestic violence to be around their children? And this man, Lee, was supposedly a defector to our country, to our arch enemy, the Soviet Union. Ruth will state that they invited Marina and her children to move in, not Lee, but that makes no sense as Lee was at the Payne household every weekend. Further, Michael, who was supposed to be estranged from Ruth at this time and living in Fort Worth, will nonetheless come to the Payne household also every week. But instead of spending time with his children, he will take Lee to no less than 6 right and left-wing meetings. Michael seems to be clearly setting Lee Oswald up to be accused of extreme political activism at some soon-to-be time. But let's go in chronological order. February 22, 1963, Ruth meets the Oswalds at the Morenschild's party. She keeps in contact. Early August 1963, Ruth packs her 2 children and takes a long road trip, stopping first at Nassau Island to spend weeks with her in-laws, even though she's supposed to be separated from their son. In September, Ruth leaves Nassau Island and travels to Washington, D.C., where she spends time with her sister, Sylvia Hoke, who is a psychologist for the CIA and has been employed by the agency since '54. Hoke's husband also works for intelligence in the Agency for International Development. From Washington, Ruth heads to New Orleans, where she picks up pregnant Marina and her toddler and takes them to live with her in Dallas. It will be 2 months until Kennedy will be killed. Then Michael Payne, estranged husband of Ruth, still comes to the Payne home every week, but instead of spending time with his children, he takes Lee Oswald to no less than 6 political meetings. Does any of this make sense if they were not babysitting the Oswalds for the CIA and making sure to set up Lee Oswald for any type of later inquiry into his supposed radical political beliefs? Hang on, it gets better. It is Ruth who gets the job at the Texas School Book Depository for Lee. She will claim that it was just a coincidence and that she heard of the job from a neighbor, but it's funny because Ruth will first deny and then admit that a better job offer came from an employment agency in the way of a phone call for Lee, but she never told him about that opportunity. And let's move to the day of the assassination. An hour after the killing, Michael is at his office at Bell Helicopter in Fort Worth. He calls Ruth. And remember that this is before Lee Oswald has even been reported to be a subject. What Michael doesn't know is that the phone call is being monitored. Michael is reported as saying that Oswald will be blamed for the killing, but they both knew who was really responsible for the assassination. Ruth will admit that the phone call took place, but will try and deny that that is exactly what was said.
On the morning of the assassination, Oswald overslept. Leaving money and his wedding ring behind, he hurried down the street to secure his ride to work with Frazier. Under his arm, he carried a brown paper package. Did this contain the gun that killed the President of the United States?
The first time I saw the package, it was on the back seat of my car, and I just glanced at it. And I said, "What's that, Lee?" And he said, that's curtain rods. She said, remember I was going to bring them? The length of the package that I saw that morning was roughly 2 foot long, give or take an inch or two. And it was made out of the same type of packing material that you would find in any company that packed materials for shipment. It's just the brown paper and the tape that you'd normally find. Nothing unusual. What we actually talked about that morning was that I mentioned, I said, President Kennedy is going to be coming to town today, and I said, you know, I've never seen a president. I said, I sure would like to get a chance to see him up close. Well, at that time, I didn't know that the motorcade in which he would be riding would come right by where we worked. He did not make any comment at all about where the president was coming to town. It didn't seem to interest him one way or the other. I parked in the parking lot at Texas School Book Depository. Lee got out of the car, took the package that he said contained curtain rods, and he put one end of the package in the cup of his hand and the other up under his armpit. He put the package under his arm that way, and he walked off toward Texas School Book Depository up on Elm Street.
The package could not have contained Oswald's rifle, for even when dismantled, it was 3 feet long. The Warren Commissioners, who investigated the assassination, ignored Frazier's unswerving testimony, insisting the weapon had been smuggled into the depository in Oswald's brown paper parcel.